The scream pierced the stillness of the October dawn, echoing through the modest homestead nestled in the foothills of the Colorado Territory. Sarah Evans clutched the bedpost as another contraction seized her body, her knuckles white with strain. The year was 1873, and this was her third time bringing life into the world, a world that had grown increasingly cold to her with each daughter born. "It's another girl," the midwife announced flatly as the newborn's cries filled the room. Thomas Evans, Sarah's husband, stood in the doorway, his weathered face hardening into stone. Without a word, he turned and stormed out of the cabin, letting the door slam behind him. Sarah knew what that meant. The same disappointment, the same contempt that had followed the births of Abigail and Rebecca. "He'll come around," the midwife offered weakly, placing the swaddled infant in Sarah's trembling arms, but Sarah knew better. In this unforgiving frontier, sons were currency, strong backs to work the land and carry on a man's legacy. Daughters were seen as burdens, mouths to feed that would eventually leave to serve another man's homestead. 3 days later, Thomas packed his belongings into a single saddlebag. "I'm heading to the silver mines in Leadville," he announced, refusing to meet her eyes. "There's enough supplies to last you till spring, after that." He shrugged, the gesture dismissing 5 years of marriage as easily as swatting a fly. "Thomas, please," Sarah begged, the newborn Julia cradled in her arms while her other daughters clung to her skirts. "They're your children. No son of mine would have eyes like that," he spat, glaring at the baby. The rumors had already started in town, whispers that Sarah had been unfaithful, that her blue-eyed daughters couldn't possibly belong to brown-eyed Thomas. The accusations were baseless, cruel fabrications, but truth mattered little in a community desperate for gossip to break the monotony of frontier life. By the time Thomas rode away, Sarah knew her position in Timber Creek was untenable. The following weeks confirmed her fears. Credit at the general store was suddenly revoked. Invitations to community gatherings evaporated. Even the church pews seemed to widen around her family each Sunday, as if her perceived sins might be contagious. By December, with snow piling against the cabin walls and supplies dwindling faster than she'd anticipated, Sarah made her decision. They would leave at first thaw, heading west toward the promise of California, where perhaps a widow with 3 daughters might start anew without the weight of whispers following her every step. But February brought both thaw and fever. Little Abigail, just 4 years old, burned with infection that left Sarah sleepless for days. By the time the child's fever broke, spring had come to the mountains and their departure became urgent. The landlord, Thomas's cousin, had made it clear that their tenancy was ending. It was a crisp April morning when Sarah loaded her daughters and their meager belongings into a small wagon pulled by their only remaining horse, an aging mare named Penny. The journey ahead was daunting, hundreds of miles across mountains and deserts, with dangers lurking at every turn. But staying meant certain destitution. They had traveled just 3 days when disaster struck. A sudden spring storm flooded the creek they were following, sweeping away their wagon in the night. Sarah managed to save her daughters and a single bag of provisions, but little else. Standing on the muddy bank at dawn, watching the last of their possessions disappear around a bend in the raging waters, Sarah felt despair creep into her heart for the first time. "Mama, I'm hungry," Rebecca whimpered, her small hand tugging at Sarah's sodden skirt. "We'll find food, sweetheart," Sarah promised, though she had no idea how she would keep that vow. The nearest settlement, according to her now lost map, was still 2 days' journey on foot. They walked until the girls couldn't take another step, then made camp beneath a stand of pines. Sarah gave the children the last of their bread, claiming she wasn't hungry though her stomach twisted with emptiness. As darkness fell, she held her daughters close, singing softly to mask the growling of wolves in the distance. "God, if you're listening," she whispered after the girls had fallen asleep, "I don't ask for myself, but please, show mercy to my children." The answer to her prayer came with the morning sun and the sound of hoofbeats. Howard Fuller spotted the smoke from their small fire while tracking a mountain lion that had been preying on his cattle. What he found instead was a woman with exhaustion etched into her face and 3 small girls huddled around a dying fire. "Madam," he called, dismounting from his stallion and approaching slowly to avoid frightening them. "You folks lost." Sarah stood, positioning herself between the stranger and her daughters. "Our wagon was taken by the creek 2 days back. We're heading to Willow Springs." Howard removed his hat, revealing sandy hair streaked with gold from the sun. At 32, his face carried the weathered look of a man who spent his days outdoors, but his eyes, a clear, steady green, held kindness that Sarah hadn't seen directed at her in months. "Willow Springs is a good 30 miles west," he said. "No way to make that on foot with little ones." "We'll manage," Sarah answered, her chin lifting with pride even as her legs trembled with fatigue. Howard studied her for a moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "My ranch is about 5 miles south of here. You and your daughters are welcome to rest there, get some proper food before continuing your journey." Suspicion flared in Sarah's mind. She'd learned the hard way that men's offers rarely came without expectations, but the pleading looks on her daughters' faces made the decision for her. "That's very kind, Mr. Fuller, Howard Fuller. Most folks call me Howie." He smiled, the expression transforming his solemn face. "And you are Sarah Evans. These are my daughters Abigail, Rebecca, and Julia." Howard knelt to the children's level, his manner gentle as he tipped his hat to each one. "Pleasure to meet you, young ladies. Would you like to ride a horse today?" The older girl's eyes widened with excitement, while baby Julia gurgled from Sarah's arms. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the knot of tension in her chest loosen slightly. The journey to Howard's ranch passed with surprising ease. He placed the older girls securely in front of him on his stallion, while Sarah walked alongside, cradling Julia. Howard filled the time with stories about his land and animals, directing his tales mainly to the fascinated children, but occasionally meeting Sarah's eyes with a warmth that made her look away, unaccustomed to such genuine regard. Cresting a small hill, Howard's property came into view, a modest but well-maintained ranch nestled in a verdant valley. A sturdy log house stood at its center, with a barn and several outbuildings arranged nearby. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures that stretched toward distant mountains. "It's not much," Howard said, suddenly self-conscious. "Just me and my foreman Miguel running the place since my father passed last year." "It's beautiful," Sarah replied honestly. After their meager cabin and the days on the trail, the ranch looked like paradise. Howard's foreman, Miguel Sanchez, greeted them at the gate, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of the children. His wife, Elena, emerged from the main house, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Howard Fuller, you bring guests and no warning." She scolded, though her eyes sparkled with good humor. "Found them stranded by Cottonwood Creek," Howard explained, helping the girls down from his horse. "Their wagon was washed away in the storm." Elena's expression softened immediately. "Pobrecitos, come inside, little ones." "I was just making biscuits." The next hours passed in a blur of warmth, food, and kindness. Elena prepared a feast that had the children wide-eyed with delight, while Miguel entertained them with stories of the ranch's animals. Howard quietly arranged for a hot bath to be drawn for Sarah and produced clean clothes belonging to his late mother. "They might be a bit old-fashioned," he apologized, "but they're clean and warm." That night, as Sarah tucked her daughters into a real bed for the first time in days, Abigail asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Mama, can we stay here forever?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair. "No, sweetheart. Mr. Fuller has been very kind, but we'll be continuing to Willow Springs soon." "But why? It's nice here. And Mr. Fuller smiles at you like Daddy used to before." The child's voice trailed off, unwilling to articulate the change that had come over Thomas Evans. "Hush now," Sarah whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. Sleep well. But sleep eluded Sarah that night as she pondered their situation. Howard's kindness seemed genuine, but she'd learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Moreover, she couldn't impose on his hospitality indefinitely. In the morning, she found Howard at the corral, mending a section of fence. "Mr. Fuller, I wanted to thank you for your kindness, but we should be moving on tomorrow." "If you could direct us to the road to Willow Springs," Howard straightened, wiping his brow. "Mrs. Evans, begging your pardon, but Willow Springs isn't what it once was. The Silver Vein played out last year and most folks have moved on. There's not much opportunity there now." Sarah's heart sank. "I see. If I may ask, what were your plans once you got there?" "I have a skill with needlework," she said. "I hope to find work as a seamstress, maybe open a small shop eventually." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "We could use those skills here in Pinewood." "It's about 15 miles east, small but growing. They've just built a schoolhouse." Hope flickered within Sarah. "A proper town?" "Yes, madam. Church, general store, even got a doctor last year." He hesitated, then added, "And if you need a place to stay while you get established, my offer stands." "This house is too big for just me, and Alina would be pleased to have another woman around." Suspicion flared again. "Mr. Fuller, I don't want there to be any misunderstanding, Mrs. Evans," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering as one Christian to another. No strings, no expectations. The guest cabin has stood empty since my mother passed. It would be a blessing to see it occupied again." Looking into his earnest face, Sarah wanted desperately to believe him. But Thomas had once looked at her with similar kindness, before disappointment had twisted him into someone she barely recognized. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Howard nodded respectfully. "Of course, take all the time you need." That afternoon, while the children napped, Sarah helped Alina in the kitchen, kneading dough for the evening bread. The older woman worked in companionable silence for a while before speaking. "He is a good man, you know," she said suddenly, nodding toward the window where Howard could be seen working with Miguel in the pasture. "Not like some." Sarah focused intently on the dough. "I'm sure he is. When his father was dying, Howard could have sold this place, moved to Denver. Many wanted to buy it, but he stayed because of us, because Miguel and I would have nowhere to go." Alina shaped a loaf with practiced hands. "He sees people, not just what they can do for him." "My husband saw only what I couldn't give him," Sarah found herself admitting. "A son." Alina's weathered hand covered Sarah's. "Some men are fools. They do not see the blessing before them." Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Sarah found Howard on the porch, pipe in hand as he watched the stars emerge. "May I join you?" she asked hesitantly. He stood immediately, offering her a chair. "Please." Sarah sat, arranging her borrowed skirts. "I've been thinking about your offer." "And?" His expression was carefully neutral. "I'm grateful but concerned. The people in town, they'll talk if I stay here." Howard puffed his pipe thoughtfully. "Folks talk regardless, Mrs. Evans. But if it eases your mind, the cabin sits just within sight of the main house, but far enough for privacy. Completely proper." Sarah studied his profile in the fading light. "Why are you helping us, Mr. Fuller?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, softly, 6 years ago, my sister Caroline found herself in a similar situation. Her husband abandoned her when their second daughter was born. She tried to make it on her own." He tapped his pipe against the porch rail. "Winter of '67 was brutal. We didn't know she was in trouble until it was too late." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. Howard nodded, his jaw tight with old grief. "When I saw you and your girls by that creek, I couldn't help but think of Caroline. What might have been different if someone had offered her shelter when she needed it most?" His honesty disarmed her final defenses. "We'll stay until I can establish work in Pinewood," she decided. "But I insist on contributing. Perhaps I could mend your clothing, help with household tasks. If that makes you comfortable, then we have an agreement." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, the touch sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. The days stretched into weeks as spring bloomed across the valley. The guest cabin, once cleaned and aired, proved perfect for Sarah, and her daughters close enough to the main house for meals and company, but private enough for them to establish their own routines. Elena taught Sarah the workings of the ranch kitchen, while Howard took genuine delight in showing the older girls the gentler animals. "Look, Mama," Abigail called one morning, perched atop a docile mare with Howard walking alongside, his hand steady on the reins. "I'm riding all by myself." "Wonderful, sweetheart," Sarah called back, watching from the porch where she sat mending one of Howard's shirts. The sight of her daughter's joy and Howard's patient instruction warmed her heart in a way she hadn't experienced in years. True to his word, Howard drove Sarah to Pinewood the following week. The small but thriving settlement welcomed the newcomer, particularly once the ladies of the church discovered her skill with a needle. Orders for mending and dressmaking began to trickle in, giving Sarah hope that independence might eventually be possible. Yet, as May turned to June, Sarah found herself increasingly content with their arrangement at the ranch. The girls blossomed under Howard's kind attention, losing their timidity and gaining healthy color in their cheeks. Even baby Julia seemed to flourish, taking her first steps across the cabin floor to delighted applause from them all. One evening, as Sarah sat on a blanket watching Howard teach the girls to fish in the creek that bordered his property, she realized with startling clarity that she was happy, truly happy for the first time in years. The knowledge was as frightening as it was exhilarating. "Penny for your thoughts," Howard said, settling beside her as the girls squealed over a small trout Rebecca had caught. Sarah smiled. "They're worth more than that, I think. Name your price, Mrs. Evans." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Sarah," she said suddenly. "Please call me Sarah." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Sarah," he repeated softly, as if testing the sound of it. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities until little Julia tottered over, demanding attention. Howard lifted the child with practiced ease, tickling her until she giggled uncontrollably. Later that night, alone in her bed, Sarah confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Howard Fuller. The realization terrified her. Once before, she had given her heart, only to have it trampled when she failed to produce the sons her husband craved. How could she risk such pain again? Yet Howard was different from Thomas in his gentleness, his patience, the way he delighted in her daughters rather than resenting them. Each day revealed new facets of his character that only deepened her regard. The following Sunday after church, Howard approached Sarah with an unusual request. "The county fair is next weekend in Silverton," he said, shifting his hat in his hands. "I thought perhaps you and the girls might like to attend. They have pie competitions, horse races, all sorts of entertainments." "That sounds lovely," Sarah replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the thought of a day in his company away from the ranch. "It would mean staying overnight," he added carefully. "But the hotel has proper accommodations for ladies with children. Elena has agreed to accompany us as chaperone." The consideration behind his planning touched her. Then we would be delighted to accept. The fair exceeded all expectations. Sarah watched her daughters experience wonders they'd never seen before: a carousel with painted wooden horses, a man who created animals from colored balloons, cotton candy that dissolved on their tongues like sweet clouds. Throughout the day, Howard remained attentive but respectful, his joy seemingly derived from their happiness. That evening, after the girls were asleep in the adjoining room of their hotel suite with Elena nodding in a chair nearby, Howard invited Sarah to join him on the small balcony overlooking the town square. "Did you enjoy yourself today?" he asked, offering her his jacket against the evening chill. "More than I can express," she answered honestly, wrapping the garment around her shoulders. It carried his scent: leather, pine, and something uniquely him. "The girls will be talking about it for weeks. And you," his voice lowered, "what will you remember most?" Sarah met his gaze, her heart thundering in her chest. Your kindness, to them and to me." Howard's hand found hers on the railing, his touch tentative. "Sarah, I've grown to care deeply for you and your daughters these past months." "Howard, please let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I know you've been hurt. I know trust doesn't come easily anymore, but I want you to know that I admire everything about you, your strength, your grace, your devotion to your children." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "My daughters are wonderful," he interrupted firmly. "Every one of them. Any man would be proud to call them his own." "Their father didn't think so," she whispered, the old pain surfacing. Howard's face hardened momentarily. "Then he's a fool who didn't deserve them or you." His expression softened as he carefully brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'm not asking for promises, Sarah. Just a chance to show you that not all men measure worth by the same flawed standard." Under the canopy of stars, with the sounds of the fair winding down below them, Sarah allowed herself to believe it might be possible a second chance at happiness, with a man who saw value where her husband had seen only failure. "I think I'd like that," she whispered. Their courtship proceeded with careful deliberation through the summer months. Howard never presumed, always asked permission before even the most innocent touches. He courted not only Sarah but her daughters as well, bringing small gifts suited to each child's personality, a book of fairy tales for imaginative Rebecca, a carved wooden horse for adventurous Abigail, a soft rag doll for baby Julia. By August, Sarah's sewing business had grown enough that she could have afforded modest lodgings in Pinewood. Yet when Howard suggested they remain at the ranch, she found herself agreeing without hesitation. "The cabin suits us perfectly," she told him as they walked along the creek one evening, the girls racing ahead to catch fireflies. "And the girls would miss the animals terribly." "Just the animals?" Howard asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. Sarah smiled. "Perhaps not only the animals." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Sarah, I've been thinking." A shout from Abigail interrupted whatever he'd been about to say. They both turned to see Thomas Evans riding toward them, his horse kicking up dust in the fading light. Sarah's blood ran cold. She hadn't seen her husband in over a year, had heard nothing from him since his departure. Yet here he was, his face twisted with the same contempt she remembered. "So the rumors are true," Thomas called, dismounting. "My wife has taken up with the rancher." Howard stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah. "Mr. Evans, I presume, your wife and daughters have been guests on my property while establishing themselves in the community." Thomas ignored him, focusing his glare on Sarah. "Thought you'd run off to California. Instead, I find you've set up house with the first man to take pity on you." "Thomas, please," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you want?" "What's mine?" he snapped. "I've had some success in the mines, bought property near Denver. I've come to collect my family." Howard's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "Mrs. Evans is free to make her own decisions, sir," Thomas sneered. "Is that what you think? She's my wife under the law, the children are mine, I could have you arrested for harboring them." Fear gripped Sarah's heart. While she had no desire to reconcile with Thomas, she knew the law favored husbands and fathers almost absolutely. "The girls," she said urgently to Howard, "they can't see him like this." Understanding immediately, Howard nodded to Miguel, who had approached at the commotion. The foreman quietly gathered the children, leading them back toward the house despite their protests. "Mr. Evans," Howard said once the girls were out of earshot, "I suggest we discuss this matter civilly. Perhaps over dinner," Thomas laughed harshly. "I'm not breaking bread with the man who stole my wife. Sarah, gather your things and the girls, we're leaving tonight." Sarah found her courage then, straightening to her full height. "No, Thomas, we're not. You don't have a choice, woman." "Actually, she does," Howard interjected. From his pocket, he withdrew a folded document. This arrived just yesterday from the territorial court. Notice of abandonment filed on Sarah's behalf 3 months ago. You failed to respond within the required time. Thomas lunged for the paper, but Howard held it out of reach. "The law states clearly, A man who abandons his family for more than 1 year without providing support forfeits his rights until proper proceedings can determine custody and support obligations. You can't, Thomas sputtered. I didn't, Howard replied evenly. Sarah did, with the help of Judge Patterson in Silverton. You're welcome to contest it, but until then, Sarah and her daughters remain under their own authority, not yours. Thomas's face flushed dark red. You think some paper changes anything? Those girls carry my name. But not your love or protection, Sarah said quietly. You left us to starve, Thomas, called our daughters worthless because they weren't sons. What kind of father does that? The kind who recognizes value, Thomas spat. Girls are burdens, not blessings. Howard's control finally snapped. Those children are worth 10 of you, Evans. Each one has more courage, more kindness, more potential than you could ever understand. I'd be proud to raise every one of them as my own daughters all and count myself blessed for the privilege. The declaration hung in the air between them, stunning both Sarah and Thomas into silence. Thomas recovered first, his expression calculating. So that's how it is, you want my leavings. He stepped closer to Howard, his voice lowering. Take them then. But know this, those blue-eyed brats aren't even mine. Sarah's been playing you for a fool, just like she did me. Before Sarah could protest the vicious lie, Howard's fist connected with Thomas's jaw, sending the smaller man sprawling into the dust. Mr. Evans, Howard said, his voice deadly calm as Thomas scrambled to his feet. I suggest you leave my property immediately. If you attempt to approach Sarah or her daughters again without legal counsel present, I won't be so restrained. Thomas wiped blood from his lip, his eyes darting between them. Whatever he saw in Howard's expression must have convinced him of the futility of further confrontation. With a final venomous glare, he mounted his horse and rode away. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Sarah turned to Howard, her hands trembling. I'm sorry, I never thought he would. Don't apologize for him, Howard interrupted gently. Never that. But what he said about the girls is nonsense meant to hurt you. Howard took her hands in his. Sarah, I meant what I said. Your daughters are precious beyond measure exactly as they are. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You truly feel that way, with all my heart. He hesitated, then continued softly. I was planning to speak with you tonight anyway, before we were interrupted. I wanted to ask if you'd consider making our arrangement permanent. Howard, he released her hands only to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Sarah Evans, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you allow me the privilege of being a father to your daughters? Sarah's heart soared even as caution held her back. Are you certain? There will always be talk, always be those who believe the worst. Let them talk, Howard said firmly. I know the truth of your character, and that's all that matters to me. Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unstoppable. Then yes, Howard Fuller. Yes, with all my heart. Their wedding took place on a perfect September afternoon, with the aspen trees turning gold against the mountains. The entire community turned out, any lingering gossip silenced by the obvious devotion between the couple and Howard's clear adoration of his new daughters. Abigail, Rebecca, and little Julia served as flower girls, scattering petals down the church aisle with expressions of solemn importance. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Howard knelt down to include the girls in their first family embrace. I promise to love and cherish each of you, he told them, for all the days of my life. That evening, after a celebration that lasted well into the night, Sarah and Howard stood on the porch of the main house, their home, now watching the stars emerge over the valley. Happy, Mrs. Fuller? Howard asked, his arm around her waist. Completely, she answered, leaning into his embrace. Though I confess, I'm a little nervous about tomorrow. Why tomorrow particularly? Sarah smiled up at him. Because tomorrow I need to tell you that our family will be growing again by spring. Howard's expression transformed from confusion to wonder. Sarah, are you saying yes? She confirmed, guiding his hand to rest against her still flat stomach. Another child to love, whatever God grants us. Howard gathered her close, his eyes shining with joyful tears. Boy or girl, this child will be cherished beyond measure just like their mother and sisters. I know, Sarah whispered, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. That's why I love you. 6 months later, as winter released its grip on the valley, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl with their father's green eyes. Howard cradled them both with equal tenderness, proudly introducing them to their older sisters who clambered onto the bed to meet their new siblings. 4 daughters and a son, he announced, his voice thick with emotion. I'm the richest man in the territory. Sarah watched her husband, this man who had taught her to trust again, who had embraced her daughters as his own when their own father had rejected them, and knew that she too had found a treasure beyond price. A love that valued what truly mattered, that saw blessing where others saw burden, that promised to shelter and cherish her family through whatever life might bring. In the wilds of Colorado, where survival often depended on strength and grit, they had discovered that the greatest strength came not from conforming to others' expectations, but from following the wisdom of their hearts, and in doing so, had built a legacy of love that would endure long after the whispers had faded into silence.